So in today's video, let me present what I would consider a solution to one of the most basic things you'll come across in like any woodworking project. Making a small gift box all the way to like a large cabinet, you're gonna come across this kind of problem here. We've got a piece of wood here, and we've got another piece of wood here. And between the two, they're connected by a third piece of wood. And based on the plans, you need the distance, the outside distance of these to be exactly X units. Now, some projects, it may not matter if this is X or X.01 units, but sometimes you've absolutely got to nail this measurement. So how wide do you cut this piece right here so that the outside distance is what you want? Now this problem seems pretty simple. You measure the thickness of these two, subtract it from X, and you get your measurement. But the reality is that these measurements can be kind of tricky. You know, like here's a piece of plywood that's supposed to be ½ inch thick. It measures at 0.477 inches. Here's a piece that's supposed to be a ½ inch thick. That's what it's marketed as when it's sold. And we're at 0.217 inches. You know, we can switch over to the metric system. Here's a 15 millimeter piece of plywood. It's actually 14.47, so about a ½ millimeter under. Here's a 12 millimeter piece of plywood. 11.56 is 0.44 millimeters under. Let's pretend you're using like an actual piece of wood that you've put through the planer a couple times, and you're gonna get a random number like 23.94, or if we go to inches, we got 0.94 inches. Let's say the one side of the box is a piece of regular wood. You've got a piece of plywood on the back. You combine them, you get 0.4185 inches, or if you're just using a tape measure, you know, you measure these two, and you go, okay, well, I'm at a a couple hairs under 1 7/16. There's just so much guesswork, such a lack of precision in that process. So let me show you what I do so that I can nail this measurement first try, and it works every time. Now I do have to say this method relies on having a pretty damn well-tuned table saw. My table saw, I trust the scale. I can make a cut, weeks later come back, if I need the same size part, I can get within a couple thousandths of that measurement just by using the scale on mine. If you've got slop in your tools, this method will not work as well as I'm presenting today. But here's my general process. So for this first example, let's pretend you're trying to cut this kind of skinny piece of wood to the exact length that you need so you can nail that outside measurement. Now instead of messing with any kind of like give or take here on the scale, I'll just set this to that value X, exactly what I need. And then I'll actually take a couple offcuts of whatever the sides are made out of, those two outer pieces, and I'll just place them against the fence. Then I'll take my miter gauge, and I can essentially use those as spacers so that the distance from the blade here plus the distance of those two outside pieces is exactly what I need. My extra pieces here, they just travel with the piece as I'm making my motion. And if you don't want them to travel with it, you know, you can just hold this here and then essentially slide these out if for some reason you don't like those pieces sliding with it. Now this works for, you know, small items, anything in a miter gauge you can fit, you know, maybe 6, 8 inches, maybe 10, 12 inches depending on your setup. But let's pretend you're making a cabinet and you've got like a whole cabinet back you need to hit, so you're gonna try to run a sheet of plywood through here or something. In that case, this miter gauge just won't work. When that happens, what I'll do is I'll grab this Featherboard, actually made by Mag Switch. I used to use different items for this. You know, I had just like a little magnet I would place here. I've tried to hold down blocks, but this has taken a lot of the guesswork out of that and just made the whole process just a lot more controlled feeling. But essentially, I'll place this thing quite close to wherever I need it. And the advantage of this little Featherboard is it has these little turn wheels that essentially let you just fine tune and use them as kind of like a depth stop. And once I have, you know, some resistance here about what I'm looking for, you don't want it so tight that it's pushing this away or these are stuck in here, but you also don't want any play. Once I'm happy with that fit, I'll have this locked down with that spacer exactly where I need it. I'll lift these out and then I'll actually adjust my fence over so it is touching that exactly where I need. Now once I'm happy with that fit, you know, sometimes I'll use just a little bit of knocking there just to make sure I got nice contact between that spacer and the fence. I can get rid of this and then cut my sheet of plywood to exactly that size. And then just to show how well this works, if you look at the size of these two, you can feel that these are basically spot on, exactly the same width. So this works for kind of like medium-sized pieces, large panels. So then let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, really small pieces. If you've got something that just needs to be a couple inches wide, there's going to be a point at which you just can't have your miter gauge on this side, because let's pretend you need your fence like right here. So you can't put your miter gauge on the other side, but you're going to have this dangerous situation here that hopefully you're familiar with. But if you make this cut right here, you're going to have this cut piece kind of dancing between the blade and the fence. It's probably going to clock itself and become a projectile. You should look up Kickback and such if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about. So in this situation, what I'll do is I'll set this fence to whatever I need. I'll grab my piece that I'm going to be cutting, and I'll just place it against the fence. And I'll move the fence away. Now, if you only need to make one of these, then you're basically ready to make your cut. Once you make this, that piece can move anywhere it wants. But once again, if I need to make multiples of this, I'll use that same little featherboard. I'll set it where I need. I'll adjust the little spinny wheel so it makes nice contact with this bit. And then I'm ready to make my cuts. So there you go. That's basically a woodworking technique that I use I find like almost any project I undertake these days. Making a box with some kind of fixed outside dimensions is just like such a fundamental thing. It comes into play in almost any project you undertake. Instead of being worried about a little bit over, a little bit under some fraction or some decimal, trying to line it up with like a fairly coarse scale here on the table saw, I can just use the actual material as the spacer. I don't even care how thick it is. I just care that that distance on the outside measurements is exactly what it is here on the blade, and those spacers just take away all the guesswork. So anyways, I hope you find that useful, and I hope you can use it in one of your own projects. Thank you.